I'm just going to start. Okay. So these kind of consults are whatever you'd like them to be. We can talk about specific things. We can run through all of your results, go through the platform, whatever works for you.
Perfect. I would love to go over just the more like concerning markers, or the lower markers. That'd be great to kind of like run through those.
Okay. I'm happy to share my screen unless you'd rather it just be a video, whatever works for you.
Share the screen. That'd be great.
Okay. So then it'll also be recorded in this.
That's okay. That's okay.
Okay.
I'm pretty honest. Go for it.
All right. Where are you based right now?
Right now I'm in Southern California.
Oh, okay, nice. I'm in Oakland.
Okay, yeah. A little cold up there, huh?
It is cold. So it's I'm sitting on top of a heater and it's 60 degrees. I moved from Boston, but I am a wuss right now.
I know the California weather will change you real quick.
Yeah, it definitely does. I have a puffy coat, which is official Bay Area gear.
Oh, that's mandatory Bay Area gear.
Yeah. Okay, vitamin D. So you're currently taking a supplement, or is it a new
Now
supplement?
I am. After I saw the results, now I am for sure.
Yeah, vitamin D is an interesting one. Like being a lot of warm weather, like southern half of the US, we still see a lot of people that have lower levels of vitamin D. A lot of that is just due to the fact that most people are wearing sunblock when they're outside, wearing some sort of clothing. And if you have any sort of like pigment in your skin, it also makes it a little bit more difficult for your skin to be able to make that vitamin D. Typically, our skin is what's really responsible for producing vitamin D in response to the sunshine. It's also a fat soluble vitamin, meaning that we store it in our fat. So it's kind of like if your body is going to use its stores, unless you're getting in kind of a consistent amount pretty regularly. Sources of vitamin D in the diet are pretty limited to fatty fish and fortified dairy. But even if you're eating fatty fish every day, which we don't recommend, and fortified dairy, it's hard to get enough vitamin D really to lift your levels out of this deficient level where you are now.
Yeah.
But your vitamin D supplement, I'd really recommend taking that for 2 to 3 months. That should be a long enough period of time to move you up into this optimal zone. And then you don't have to take it every day, but it's a good indicator that, just your normal day to day, you're not getting enough vitamin D either from your diet or the sun. So then keeping that 5,000 maybe just once a week or twice a week will be enough to help you kind of maintain that store that you've built up.
Okay, perfect. What could low vitamin D typically cause?
Well, at the moment, it is COVID. It won't cause COVID, but it's gotten a ton of press recently, just about individuals that have lower levels of vitamin D having poor outcomes for COVID.
Totally.
Earlier this week or last week, they just released a pretty big study about the daily recommendations for vitamin D. Right now, it's set at 400 IU, and hundreds of kind of like leading scientists came out and said that needs to be closer to 2,000 to 4,000 IUs that we're recommending for people. But it does play a role certainly in immune health. We see it especially at levels over 40. It has an impact really on the muscle and can help with muscle really recovery and repair. It's also associated with testosterone levels. Low levels of vitamin D can also be associated with lower levels of testosterone. There's a lot of vitamin D while it's a vitamin, it really functions a lot more like a hormone. And truthfully, it's made through the same pathway that cholesterol is made. So it's also something that could be lower for people that take any sort of statin, because statins basically stop that cholesterol production pathway, which also kind of halts the body's ability to produce enough vitamin D from the sun.
Nice. Awesome.
An important one. I'm glad it's getting a lot of press recently.
For sure. I know, because most of my job, is indoors. So even though I love being outside, I'm pretty much 12 hours of the day indoors and get like my 20-minute rec time for my walk in between, lunch, so it's definitely not enough.
Yeah. And again, it's a hard one to get enough of, especially the line in the US is San Francisco, basically like to the Mason-Dixon line between Maryland and Pennsylvania. anyone that lives above that line, how the sun or how the earth tilts away from the sun in wintertime, then like the strength of the UV rays aren't strong enough to produce that vitamin D in the skin. So that's a complicating factor. Again, if you ever are wearing sunscreen, which most people are wearing sunscreen, SPF over 15, we can't make vitamin D then. It's too much protection, basically. The sunscreen's working to protect us from those UV rays. Clothing, it won't go through, and darker skin tones, it won't go through. And then certainly for older people too, as you age, the ability for like that process of producing vitamin D from the sun also decreases.
Nice.
All right, let's see. Next one, lipid group. Have you ever talked about your cholesterol before?
No, actually, never.
Okay. So we have 4 different markers here. Basically, you can think about your total testosterone or total cholesterol, as just a combination of these 3 different markers. So you have your LDL plus your HDL, and then a fraction of your triglycerides are included in this. LDL is what's often termed that quote unquote bad cholesterol. And that's just because it's the type of cholesterol that if it's too high for too long, and you also have some inflammation in your body, it can start to cause kind of those plaques, if you've heard of that, building up in your arteries. Where your level is at 99, I'm not concerned about it, but technically you'd want it to always stay below 100. If it gets, up into the 140, 150 or above range, that's usually when your doctors are signaling that a statin or a medication to help lower that cholesterol might be important. But this LDL is, again, that type of cholesterol that could potentially be harmful. We need cholesterol in the body. Cholesterol is used for production of all of our hormones, including that vitamin D. It's also included in every single cell in the body. It's part of our cell membranes that basically helps our cells kind of maintain their structure. So the goal is certainly not to completely eliminate cholesterol. Our body makes it anyways because we need it, but just making sure that you don't have too much of it, in particular this LDL. The other one, and then we'll hop back here. This other cholesterol, this HDL, is what's often called that good cholesterol. And the relationship is really, I kind of like to think about it as cops and robbers. HDL's relationship to LDL is really that it goes out into the blood system and tries to pick up extra cholesterol before it can potentially cause damage. So if you have, let's think of LDL as robbers. If you have more robbers out on the street, ideally you also have more people in your police force that can pick up those robbers before they cause, wreak all sorts of havoc in the mean streets of your blood vessels. So that's good that your HDL is also high because it's protective against this LDL level. There is an upper limit to what we have as that optimal zone for HDL, just because after a certain point, it's no longer protective against kind of to offset the potential harm of that high LDL.
Got
Some
it.
things that we've seen. Yep, go
Do
ahead. Sorry.
like a 1-to-1 ratio?
Ideally, you're going to be somewhere in like a 3-to-1 ratio, 2.5 to 3. If you're at 1-to-1, great. We've certainly seen that before, but 2 to 2, like 2 to 3 is a good place to be. 2 to 3 to 1 ratio.
Got it. Got it.
How about in your diet? Do you have a lot of healthy fat intake or fat intake in general?
Yeah, usually I get a decent amount of fat. Lately haven't been so great about it, but for the most part, lots of avocados, omega-3s and stuff like that whenever I can get it in, for sure.
Gotcha. Okay. That could be one thing for, HDL levels being higher. I don't think it's super concerning to think about trying to intentionally cut out those types of healthy fats. Again, it's protective. It's just after a certain point, it's not as protective. If you also have that really high level of that LDL, it's kind of a newer phenomenon. There's some genetic conditions that result in people having higher levels of HDL. I don't think that's what's going on for you, but it's a newer thing for HDL levels to be really high, just with the recent obsession with all fat diets, truthfully. So
Uh-huh.
keto diets being so popular, that's
Oh
really
yeah.
where a lot of this research coming out about having an HDL level that's really high, while if it's still in that kind of 2 to 3 ratio with your LDL, at a certain point, you're just not getting the benefits from that HDL anymore because that LDL is also so high.
Makes sense.
Not the case for you, but that's kind of where this upper limit for us came with HDL, is just to encourage people on very high fat diets to not assume that just because their HDL is high, that also means they're okay for LDL.
Yeah. Would a lot of cheese cause high LDLs?
So it can. So there's two nutrients to really focus on for HDL. As I mentioned before, our bodies are going to produce cholesterol anyways, regardless of what we eat. But if you have a diet that's higher in saturated fat, and usually you get saturated fat from animal sources of fat, in addition to coconut oil is very high in saturated fat, as is cocoa butter. Um, the type of LDL cholesterol that's produced from saturated fat kind of hangs around in the body for a little bit longer. So your
Mm,
body's still producing more of this LDL, but then LDL that's made from saturated fat also hangs around for a longer time. So it can make that LDL level higher.
makes sense.
So really animal fats, as well as again, that coconut oil and that cocoa butter. Coconut oil, I have no idea who marketed it as a health food. They should be a billionaire for their marketing skills, because there is, other than it being a high temperature cooking fat, it's honestly has more saturated fat in it than butter. So it definitely can contribute to this LDL level being on the higher side. The
Interesting.
other nutrient to really focus on for LDL2 is soluble fiber. And there's two types of fiber. Soluble fiber, you can think about it as, does it swell when it comes into contact with water? The other type of fiber is insoluble fiber, which isn't impacted by water at all. So a great way to kind of visualize is if you put it in a fridge overnight, does it look different when it's been sitting in water, or does it not? So if you think about chia seeds and oats, great sources of soluble fiber. They've completely absorbed that water and look really different. Broccoli and celery look exactly the same because they don't really have any of that soluble fiber in it. And that soluble fiber is so important because it impacts one of the functions of cholesterol. And it's really the only thing that we can kind of control to increase our body's usage of cholesterol. So there's a compound called bile that our small intestines excretes when we eat fat, to be able to break down fat basically into a small enough form that we can absorb it. Usually there's like a 97 to 98% recycle rate of bile. And when we eat soluble fiber, that soluble fiber ends up binding to that bile and then transporting it out of the body. But we need bile, so the body produces more of it. And it does that by utilizing cholesterol. And that's really the only way that we can impact the rate of cholesterol really being used. You know, we don't necessarily get to say like, hey, I really want my cells to have more cholesterol in them today, or I want to make more vitamin D. You can't necessarily think that, but you can intentionally include more soluble fiber, which is going to pull out that bile and then make your body use more cholesterol to reproduce it.
Makes sense. Makes
So
sense.
that soluble fiber piece is also super key. Oats and barley tend to be the best sources of soluble fiber, but again, visualizing anything that's going to swell when it's in contact with water has some soluble fiber in it. So any whole grain, some nuts and seeds, beans are another great source. Those are all things to try and incorporate at least once or twice a day.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome.
Lengthy explanation on that, but
No, I love it. Your explanations are great. I love them.
awesome. Thank you. Your total cholesterol that's here again is mostly just high because your HDL is probably on the higher side. I don't think that this is really anything to be concerned about. If this total cholesterol was high because your LDL was really high and your HDL was really low, that kind of ratio was closer to 4 or 5 to 1, that would be a reason for concern with this total cholesterol.
Yeah. Good point. Good point.
All right, next one, creatine kinase. So this is, and you're a chiropractor, correct?
Yeah. Correct.
So this is a marker of muscle damage. It's an enzyme that naturally lives in your muscle. And anytime you do some, or you have some sort of muscle damage, it's going to seep into the bloodstream, which the point of any type of exercise, especially strength or resistance type exercises, to cause some muscle damage. So
Mhm.
it being high isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's actually something that we would want to see, especially if you're doing any type of strength or resistance training, because that means that your training was effective. You damaged your muscles, which means that they're going to come back stronger once they repair. This one typically peaks about 2 to 5 days after a muscle damaging workout. And it's, if you work out regularly, it's pretty hard to find 5 days when you would be completely off from activity. So it being high again is not necessarily a bad thing. It's one, a good thing to show you that you did some muscle damage. But another thing to take from it too is just you want to make sure that you have enough protein in your diet
Mhm.
in order to have those building blocks of protein, that amino acid, available to help with that muscle repair.
Yeah, because I even noticed when I first saw this, I was thinking about it and I was reading the descriptions afterwards, and I was like, you know what? I don't necessarily get like a ton of protein. It's not something that I focus on. And I've noticed for the past probably like 2, 3 months, my body just feels like it hasn't been recovering
Mm,
well. Just feel like I'm always kind of sore, achy. My
yeah,
job's physical too. And I've noticed just even including like just a little bit more protein in my diet in the past 2 weeks, I've made a huge difference in just how I
awesome.
feel.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm happy to give you a rough protein estimate if you don't mind sharing your body weight.
Oh, perfect. I'm 190.
What kind of workouts do you do kind of regularly now?
Mostly, I'd say I run probably 3 days a week, and then I do strength exercises probably another 3 to 4 days a week.
Okay. So pretty active.
Mhm.
So a rough kind of protein goal for you would be, I'm going to give you a range, would be somewhere probably between 100 and 135-ish, 140-ish. On those days when you do more strength training or more high intensity endurance stuff, then you'd want to lean more on those 140 side.
Okay.
On maybe rest days or days when you're doing more steady state cardio,
Uh-huh.
those would be days that you could hang out around that 100-gram mark.
Got it.
And a good thing, to think about with protein too, is that ideally you'd be able to space that protein pretty evenly between your meals and snacks.
Mhm.
So, if you're on a 100-gram day, trying to get about 25 grams in, maybe breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and a snack that's in there,
Yep.
just so that your body can adequately really be able to use that protein as it's intended, that
Mhm.
your body's not necessarily overwhelmed with the amount of protein and having to use it as an energy source instead.
Yeah. Yeah.
And with
Perfect.
that, and after your workouts, especially, honestly, all workouts, it's important to get some protein in, ideally within 45 minutes to 2 hours,
Mhm.
not stretching past 2 hours. Protein shakes can be helpful. Really, I say they're most helpful if it's unrealistic for you to be able to get in protein from whole foods within 45 minutes after a workout. If you can
Nice.
get in a meal, great. Have actual food instead of a protein supplement.
Always a better way to do it.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see.
Cool. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Your testosterone group overall, it looks good. So in your testosterone group, we have your total testosterone, which is about 95 to 98% of testosterone in your body. And it includes the majority of testosterone, or sorry, it includes all of your testosterone. 95 to 98% is bound to a transporter. Typically, that's going to be two main transporters, which is the SHBG that we have included in the group. And the other one would be albumin, which is something that we have in your liver group. So the majority of testosterone, which is also called like total testosterone, is bound, and it includes free testosterone. And this free testosterone is just a testosterone that's not bound to SHBG or albumin. Both of those look great. This SHBG being slightly elevated, this could be impacting your free testosterone. So again, this is just a transporter. So if your body has more of this transporter in there, then most likely it's binding to more free testosterone. So it doesn't mean that that free testosterone disappears. It shows in this total pot, this total testosterone pot that has free and bound in it. But this being slightly, potentially could be slightly lower just because you have more of that transporter. For you,
Mhm.
I honestly don't think it's worth worrying about because you still have a good amount of this free testosterone. But sometimes we will see people that have a optimized total testosterone, but their free testosterone is super low because this SHBG is super, super high. And that SHBG being high is something that we have seen with people that aren't eating enough energy, especially, at like very high levels of activity. In particular, that tends to track with people that are avoiding carbohydrates, but burning 3,000 to 3,500 calories a day.
Yeah.
It's also something that if you work with any athletes kind of over the course of a season, it kind of works like a sleep debt in the sense that little bits of not having enough sleep, not enough energy, not enough rest and recovery kind of can build that up over the course of, for some sports, their seasons are incredibly long and incredibly grueling without a lot of breaks.
Yeah.
But if you're working with anyone and you see this SHBG being high and free testosterone low, total testosterone okay, I kind of like to think about the softer sides of training that are so important. You can get a new rep max, you can run a fast, increase your mile or decrease your mile time. But those aren't really the only metrics of performance. These ones really make sure that like they're going to hold you honest to getting enough sleep, getting enough food, and taking enough kind of lower intensity days or rest days.
Got it. Got it.
All right, B12. So this one's slightly on the lower side. It's still within, technically, I probably should have started with this, but in case it wasn't explained, low and high, these two red zones are clinically low and high. This yellow zone is the entire normal zone. So if you were to get your blood work done anywhere else, as long as it's in this yellow zone, you would be considered normal or healthy.
Yeah.
And our optimal zones are just a lot more specific. B12, where your level is, I wouldn't really recommend a supplement just because you're still getting B12 in your diet, obviously. B12 you can really only find in animal products. So meats, fish, dairy, eggs, anything like that. That's where you're going to get the majority of B12. Other places that you'll find it are fortified foods. So where your level is, I think if you were to take a B12 supplement, it'd probably increase you more than is necessary. A great way to boost this a little bit could just be adding either a cup of, if you drink dairy, a cup of cow's milk or a cup of fortified non-dairy milk. That's going to give you like a little extra boost without really sending you too far through the roof.
Got it. Got it. Okay, not bad. I like that there's optimized zones and not just sticking with the general normal zones.
Yeah, and those optimized zones are really, I probably should have started with that. Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good.
Those optimized zones, so we make them, they're based on age, gender, ethnicity, and activity level. But it's also everything kind of with Inside Tracker is an overlay of longevity too. So for longevity as well as performance, it also looks at, other individuals in your groups. And that's how we've narrowed in on what those optimized zones are. I think probably one of the best markers to show it would be, I'm sure your iron is okay, but I'm going to scroll down and find it quickly. Because for active individuals, it's an important one. So this ferritin level, you're in your optimal zone there. Ferritin is an important marker. It's a protein that your body makes in order to store iron. So it's a really good marker for evaluating kind of your overall iron metabolism. Iron, for active individuals, especially people that do endurance activity, it's really important because iron is what produces hemoglobin on your red blood cells that let you transport oxygen. And these optimal zones, for an endurance athlete are going to be set at 60. If someone doesn't do any endurance activity, it's going to be lower. But that's because we want to have, and certainly research supports having a higher level of ferritin is really supportive of that type of activity. Once you're down into this like low level, one, you're going to feel like crap, but two, that low level is the same for you as someone that does endurance activity, as somebody that like isn't active, doesn't move whatsoever. That low is kind of across the board. And certainly if you're active, we don't want you to just not be low. We want you to have enough iron in your body to really be able to support optimal hemoglobin production, and therefore optimal oxygen circulation throughout your body, especially while you're active.
Hmm.
Yours is great, which is awesome. These
Yeah.
other markers, these two, since I'm in your iron group, this is transferrin saturation and serum iron. Those can change based on what you're eating, like based on what you had the day before. This ferritin, since your body actually has to produce a protein for it, is a better measurement of how much iron, like if you're actually getting enough iron in your body, because it's not going to jump around day to day.
Got it. That makes sense. That makes sense. Good to know.
Okay, sorry for that hop around. I think we're
No,
almost done though.
no
Your,
worries.
your last unoptimized that we have here is in your magnesium group.
Hmm.
So we test two different types of magnesium. This first one, you can think of it as kind of serum magnesium, is the amount of magnesium in your blood, but that doesn't necessarily tell us the whole story, because your blood really likes a narrow range of magnesium at all times. And you can either help your blood achieve that by eating enough magnesium or taking a magnesium supplement. If you don't, your blood still wants that narrow range. So it's going to take magnesium out of your bones in order to maintain it. So this one is actually not as good of a metric for, whether or not you're taking in enough magnesium, just because that magnesium level is going to be pretty consistent regardless of what you do, because your body's going to use your bones to make sure it stays in a pretty narrow range.
Got
This
it.
RBC magnesium is a better metric for that, because it actually measures the amount of magnesium on your red blood cells.
Okay.
And that's not something that's going to be swayed by kind of your blood trying to maintain that really narrow level. So I know you're taking a magnesium supplement and you're in this optimal zone. Did you recently start taking magnesium, or was it something you were taking before?
I was taking it like every once in a while before. Like
Okay.
it wasn't very frequent.
So even though you're in your optimal zone, I would say it's good to, be slightly more consistent with it, because this can
Okay.
continue to increase. Um, and again, it's nice that you can see a truer kind of measurement of where your magnesium is based on whether or not you're eating enough for your needs. For athletes, typically a magnesium needs are a little bit higher, just because magnesium is one of the electrolytes that we lose when we sweat.
Yeah.
So taking magnesium as a supplement is, it's a good idea for people that do engage in a lot of sweaty activity.
Yep. That makes sense. That makes
Yeah.
sense. I know it's cool to be able to see, because a lot of times I think I would have assumed I would have been much lower in magnesium, based on that.
Yep.
But it's cool to be able to see, like, okay, there's a difference between magnesium in the blood versus magnesium in your blood cells, which is a better, truer test of what's actually going on, right? Which
Yeah.
I think is what makes doing a blood test like this so much more valuable, rather than just assuming or just reading the blood test and be like, oh yeah, magnesium's low,
Yeah.
when really you can actually get a truer sense of what's going on.
Yeah, we definitely always like to say blood don't lie either, or data over drama. Like, you can't argue with what's happening in your blood so much when you can see it. You could
Yep.
think that you're doing okay or that you're not doing so well, but it's nice to have kind of like those objective data points on how well you're doing.
For sure. For sure. I love it. Love it.
And that's it. Everything else that you have is optimized. Your glucose group is awesome. This is just your fasting blood glucose, which is great. This hemoglobin A1C is pretty similar to that RBC magnesium, in that this is the amount of basically glucose that your red blood cells have picked up over their lifespan. Lifespan of a red blood cell is about 3 to 4 months. So this is giving us a 3 to 4 month average of where your fasting blood glucose levels have been. This is awesome. You have a great level. So whatever you're doing for glucose is going well. Your inflammation group, all of your inflammation markers are awesome. This CRP is a pretty non-specific marker of inflammation. We don't know what would be causing CRP to be elevated if it were to be elevated, but it looks great. White blood cells, and then these are your 5 types of white blood cells, are really your immune system. That looks great. Your liver enzymes look good. Albumin, slightly on the higher side. This could be something that's elevated if you're dehydrated, or if you are eating a super high protein diet, which doesn't necessarily sound like that's an issue for you.
No,
So it could
no.
just be that this
Dehydration, though,
was
for sure.
okay. And definitely it could be before your blood test too. just if you were slightly dehydrated heading into the test, that could be higher.
Got
Usually
it.
I would say low albumin would be an indicator of potentially something serious happening. Usually we see that with older people that have some issues with their liver.
Got it. Got it.
Iron group we talked through. And yeah, everything else for you looks good.
Beautiful.
Pretty good blood test, honestly.
Nice. Woo.
So that was a crash course. We went super quickly.
I love it. I love it. This is really helpful. And your explanations are super good.
Awesome.
I love your explanation. Like cops and robbers. I love that. It's such a great way to describe that too.
Yeah, and I'm just going to move this, around quickly. If you have it in your dashboard, we also have an app that I think is a nicer way to view these. That kind of helps you set up an action plan of just which type of these recommendations you want to implement. Gives you more information about it. If you did the DNA test, kind of ties your DNA into those two. And then it also has check-ins to try and keep you kind of honest for doing those the recommended amount of time. The app's pretty sweet. If you haven't checked it out, I definitely recommend.
Yeah, I've been using it. Awesome.
Awesome. And then, your nutrition recommendations, your food recommendations are really where I like to focus. It just gives you foods that would be able to provide you the nutrients associated with improving those markers. And then your inner age is, Inside Tracker's kind of proprietary algorithm, so to speak, for what your biological age is versus your chronological age. And you can, so you're younger. Kudos to you. And then if you scroll down, you can see the markers that may be adding years. For the most part, though, all of your markers are taking some years away, which is great.
Nice. Love it. Love it.
And that's it. That's everything you've got.
Awesome. Thank you. That was super helpful.
Yeah,
super
awesome.
Helpful.
I'm going to stop my share. And then, I'll download this recording and I'll send it to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was super, super helpful. You're great at explaining these. So thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Well, enjoy the rest of your whatever today is, Thursday.
Yeah, Thursday. I was like, what day is today?
Is the email address that your Inside Tracker account is hooked up to, is that the best place to send it?
That's perfect. That'd be great.
Awesome. Well, nice to meet you, Brady.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay warm out there, huh?
Yeah, thanks so much. See ya.
Take care.